The auction. The auction yard smelled of dust and fear. Beneath the glare of twin suns, a row of women stood chained to an iron post, their wrists rubbed raw beneath the metal. No one dared lift their eyes. The crowd had gathered early, eager for spectacle. Farmers, traders, and drifters with whiskey on their breath, jeering as if cruelty were entertainment. Evelyn stood among the captives, the wind tugging at her torn shawl. She did not flinch when the auctioneer barked her number, Lot 7, or when a boy tossed a pebble that struck her ankle. Shame had become a second skin. What unsettled her more was the laughter. It was the kind that sought to erase a person entirely. Judge Renner presided from his dais, his red sash fluttering. "Debt Lot 7, he announced. Daughter of a debtor, sold to settle what her father could not. His voice dripped with mock pity. Strong back, fair hands, suitable for service or companionship. A ripple of crude laughter followed. Evelyn kept her gaze steady, fixed on the dry horizon. She thought of the father who'd gambled everything, the home reduced to ash, and the silence that followed his arrest. She had sworn she would not cry. Renner continued, calling out figures as if she were a prize mule. 50 credits. 60. Do I hear 70? No one answered. Buyers murmured among themselves, too proud, too cautious, or too entertained to care. Evelyn felt the weight of their indifference more than their mockery. To them, she was less than human, a curiosity chained in the dust. At the back of the crowd stood two men, one tall, broad-shouldered, his hair silvered by sun, the other younger, lean, with eyes that had seen too much for his age. They were dressed like ranchers, but carried themselves with quiet restraint. The older man, Caleb Holt, rested a calloused hand on the rail. His son, Thomas, shifted beside him uneasily. "Pa," the younger murmured, "we shouldn't be here." Caleb's gaze never left the stage. Sometimes a man has to see what he wishes didn't exist. Renner banged the gavel again. "No takers? Then she'll go cheap. 40 credits, final call." Caleb's voice cut through the laughter, deep and calm. 80. The crowd stilled. Heads turned. Even the auctioneer faltered. Renner squinted. "Holt didn't take you for the buying kind." Caleb's expression didn't change. "My son needs her." The words carried weight. Not boastful, not cruel, just certain. Murmurs swept the crowd. Some chuckled. Others smirked. But no one dared bid higher. Renner grinned thinly. "Sold, then, to the Holt Ranch." Evelyn's chains were unlocked. The metal left pale marks along her wrists. She expected rough handling, but instead a coat, heavy wool, smelling faintly of cedar, was draped over her shoulders. Caleb met her eyes briefly, his face unreadable. "You'll ride in the back," he said. "There's water and bread. Rest if you can." She hesitated. "Why me?" His answer was simple. Because no one else would. Thomas brought the wagon around, eyes flicking between them, but saying nothing. The wooden wheels creaked as they left the yard, the sounds of laughter fading behind them like echoes of another world. Evelyn sat in silence, the coat gathered tightly around her. She did not look back. Ahead lay open land, endless plains of red dust and whispering grass, stretching to the horizon. The air smelled cleaner there, but freedom was still a foreign word. Caleb drove without speaking, the reins steady in his hands. Thomas occasionally glanced over his shoulder, as if searching for words he couldn't find. Finally, she asked, "You said your son needs me. What did you mean?" Caleb's eyes stayed fixed on the road. "He's lost too much too soon. A home needs a woman's presence, even if it's just a reminder of what decency looks like." Thomas's jaw tightened, but he didn't object. Evelyn stared at her hands, bruised, trembling. "And what do I need?" Caleb's tone softened. "To start again, if you choose to." They drove on in silence, the wind rising against the wagon's canvas. She felt the faint tremor of exhaustion giving way to something else. Not hope, but the smallest flicker of curiosity. The rancher who had bought her did not look like a man seeking ownership. His manner was too restrained, his kindness too unpracticed. As dusk settled, they reached the crest of a ridge. Below lay a valley framed in gold light, a modest ranch house standing lonely against the horizon. Smoke curled from its chimney. Horses grazed near a split-rail fence. It looked almost peaceful. Caleb stopped the wagon. "We'll rest here tonight. Tomorrow, you'll see the ranch proper." Evelyn stepped down, her boots sinking into the soft dirt. The air was cooler now, scented with wild sage. For the first time in months, no one was laughing. Thomas carried her small pack, the only thing she owned, and placed it beside the fire. He nodded stiffly, then walked away toward the corral. Caleb poured water from a flask into a tin cup and handed it to her. "Drink slow," he said. She did. The water tasted of iron and dust, but it steadied her. He sat opposite her, gaze lost in the flames. "You don't owe me obedience," he said quietly. "Only honesty. Can you manage that?" Evelyn nodded, uncertain. "And if I can't, then you'll learn." The fire crackled between them, shadows flickering across the dirt. Beyond the circle of light, coyotes howled somewhere in the dark. Evelyn wrapped the coat tighter, watching the sparks rise into the night sky. For the first time since her chains were removed, she felt the strange weight of being seen. Not as property, not as punishment, but as a person no one quite knew how to handle. And that, she thought, was far more dangerous than cruelty. The ranch and the sun. Morning came with the scent of dew and hay. The first light spilled over the plains, turning the Holt Ranch into a quiet sea of gold. Evelyn stood at the edge of the porch, Caleb's coat still around her shoulders, watching the sun bleed across the horizon. The wind tugged at her hair, whispering through the fences like a secret she wasn't yet ready to hear. Inside, the house was modest, clean but worn, every surface touched by work. Thomas moved through it like a shadow, silent, efficient, his expression unreadable. When he spoke, it was only to ask simple things: coffee, salt, more wood. His politeness carried the careful distance of a man who feared what closeness might invite. Caleb was gone at dawn, off to the south field to tend to a broken fence. He had left a note scratched in careful handwriting. "Do what you can. No one here will chain you again." Evelyn folded the note into her pocket and began her work. She swept the porch, gathered eggs from the henhouse, fetched water from the well. There was a peace in motion, a rhythm that kept her mind from circling back to what she had lost. But the silence of the ranch had a way of making every thought louder. By midday, Thomas returned from the pasture, dust coating his boots and the sleeves of his shirt rolled high. "You shouldn't work so hard," he said, setting down his gloves. Evelyn wiped her brow. "Work doesn't frighten me." He hesitated, then offered a small, almost reluctant smile. "That's good. Around here, it never ends." Their words carried no warmth yet, only cautious civility, like two people circling a wound neither wanted to touch. She noticed the way his eyes drifted toward her and then away again, as if seeing her reminded him of something he wasn't allowed to remember. That afternoon, the wind picked up, bringing the smell of rain. They worked together to pull in the sheets from the line. For a brief moment, their hands brushed, a spark of unintended intimacy that left them both still. Thomas cleared his throat, retreating toward the barn. "Storm will hit by nightfall," he muttered. When the rain came, it came hard, sheets of water thrashing the land, thunder rolling over the hills. Evelyn watched from the window, the glass trembling beneath the force of it. She had seen storms before, but never from a place that felt safe. Caleb returned soaked through, shoulders bowed under the weight of the weather. Thomas met him at the door with a towel. Evelyn fetched hot water without being asked. Together, they moved wordlessly, like members of a household that had existed for years, though it had only been a day. At supper, the three of them ate in near silence. The fire hissed in the hearth, and rain drummed on the roof. Finally, Caleb spoke. "This house has seen enough ghosts. Don't bring more in with you." Evelyn met his gaze. "I don't believe in ghosts." "Good," he said. "Believe in work instead. It'll keep you alive longer." Thomas's fork paused halfway to his mouth. "Work didn't keep Mother alive," he said quietly. Caleb's eyes hardened, not with anger, but with memory. "No, he said, voice low, but it kept us from starving afterward. Evelyn lowered her head. The air between them tightened, the unspoken grief of a family broken long before she arrived. She wanted to speak, to offer comfort, but knew her words would only sound like intrusion. Later, when the storm passed, Thomas stepped outside to check the fences. Evelyn followed with a lantern, unable to stay still. The sky had cleared, stars sharp and bright. Mud clung to their boots, and the smell of wet earth filled the air. "You don't have to help," he said. "I know," she replied, "but I don't like feeling useless." He turned to her, the lamplight catching in his eyes. "You're not useless. You're just a reminder." She frowned. "Of what?" He hesitated, then shook his head. "Doesn't matter." She sensed it then, the invisible boundary between them. He was drawn to her, yet afraid of what that meant. She had been bought to fill a void neither of them understood. And behind them both stood Caleb, watching with quiet eyes, holding the weight of a decision he couldn't take back. That night, Evelyn couldn't sleep. She lay on her narrow bed, listening to the creak of the house and the wind brushing against the shutters. Her thoughts tangled between guilt and gratitude. Caleb had freed her, but not entirely. Freedom, she realized, came in layers, and she was still peeling away the first. In the dark, she heard footsteps in the hall, slow, deliberate. They paused outside her door, then turned away. She exhaled, tension leaving her body like air from a wound. Morning came gray and cold. She stepped outside, and Thomas was already there, splitting logs. His expression was softer today, touched by fatigue. "I'm riding to town later," he said. "Need anything?" She shook her head. "No," then, after a pause. "Maybe paper. I'd like to write a letter." "To who?" "To no one," she said. "But sometimes writing makes silence easier to live with." He nodded. "I'll bring some." Caleb appeared behind them, his hat low against the wind. "Thomas," he said, "take the south road. Avoid Renner's men." "Yes, Pa." Evelyn watched as the younger man rode off into the open plain, the horse's hooves striking sparks from the stones. Caleb turned to her, voice even. "He's not cruel, just careful," he said. "Be patient with him." "I'm trying," she replied softly. "But patience feels a lot like loneliness." Caleb studied her for a long moment, then learned to make peace with loneliness. It's the only thing that stays. He walked away, leaving her standing beneath the wide morning sky. She watched the trail dust fade into the distance, her heart caught between gratitude for the man who saved her and the growing ache for the son who couldn't decide if she was a gift or a curse. And somewhere deep inside, a question began to form, one she dared not speak aloud. Had she been brought here to heal them, or to break them further? The betrayal. The summer heat arrived without mercy. Days stretched long and slow across the Holt Ranch, the air thick with the hum of cicadas and the smell of sweat-soaked earth. Evelyn worked from dawn until the shadows turned blue, her hands raw from the rope and the washboard. Work dulled her thoughts until night came, and silence forced her to listen to the things she tried to forget. Thomas had grown more distant since the trip to town. He spoke less, though his glances carried an intensity that unsettled her. There was something fragile beneath his stoicism, guilt, perhaps, or longing. Caleb noticed too, but said nothing. The air between father and son had thickened, stretched by things unspoken. One evening, Evelyn found Thomas by the corral, mending a gate beneath the dying light. He didn't see her approach until she spoke. "You've been gone in your head lately," she said. He looked up, a humorless smile on his lips. "You sound like my father." Then maybe he's right. Thomas leaned on the post, eyes fixed on the horizon. He's always right. That's the problem. Evelyn stepped closer, her voice gentle. "What's wrong, Thomas?" He hesitated. "You shouldn't ask questions you don't want answers to." "Try me." He turned then, eyes sharp and tired. "Every time I see you, I think of what we've lost. And every time I don't, I think of what I can have." The honesty of it caught her off guard. She wanted to retreat, to let the wind swallow his confession. But her heart, traitorous thing, ached instead. She whispered, "You don't even know me." He stepped closer. "I know enough." When his hand brushed her arm, The world seemed to hold its breath. She didn't move. The space between guilt and desire was a knife's edge, and both of them knew it. His lips met hers, briefly, desperately, and the taste of him was salt and regret. Then, as suddenly as it began, it was over. Caleb's voice came from the shadows. "Thomas." The younger man froze. Evelyn turned, heart hammering. Caleb stood at the fence line, his face unreadable, the lantern in his hand casting long, broken lines of light across the dirt. "Go inside," he said quietly. Thomas obeyed, shoulders rigid, disappearing into the dark. Evelyn remained, her breath shallow. "It wasn't." Caleb stopped her with a glance. "You owe me no defense, but you owe yourself the truth. I didn't mean for it to happen." He nodded once. Things worth meaning rarely do. For a long moment, they stood in silence, the air charged with the weight of what couldn't be said. Caleb finally turned away, his voice quieter now. "You remind him of someone he couldn't save. That's not your fault. But don't mistake pity for love." She should have agreed. She should have apologized. Instead, she asked, "And what do I remind you of?" Caleb paused, lantern light catching the edge of his jaw. "Everything I tried to bury." The word struck harder than any reprimand. He walked away then, leaving her alone beneath the vast and silent sky. That night, sleep eluded her. She sat by the window, watching the moonlight crawl across the floorboards. The house was still, yet the air felt thick with unspoken things. When she finally rose, her feet carried her, without permission, past the cold fireplace, past Thomas's door, down the hall toward the sound of soft movement in the barn. Caleb was there, seated on a hay bale, a bottle resting between his hands. The lamplight carved shadows into the lines of his face. "You shouldn't be here," he said, not looking up. "Neither should you," she replied. He let out a low, humorless breath. "Maybe not, but I've lived long enough to know that loneliness makes fools of us all." Evelyn took a cautious step closer. "Thomas thinks I belong to him, but I don't even know what that means anymore." Caleb finally met her gaze. "You belong to yourself. That's all you ever did." His voice carried the weight of conviction and sorrow both. She felt her throat tighten. "Then why does it hurt so much to be free?" He looked away. "Because freedom doesn't heal what love breaks." She sank to her knees beside him, the straw scratching her palms. The distance between them felt unbearable, so she reached out, just once, her fingers brushing his sleeve. He didn't move, didn't stop her. For the first time since she'd arrived, Caleb's composure cracked. The silence between them deepened, heavy and fragile. "I brought you to save you," he said finally. "Not to damn us both." Evelyn's voice was barely a whisper. "Then why does it feel like you're the one who needs saving?" The question hung in the air. Caleb turned his head, and for a heartbeat, the restraint that had defined him gave way. His hand rose slow, uncertain, until his fingers found her cheek. The touch was brief, no longer than a prayer, but it burned through them both. When he withdrew, his voice was a hoarse whisper. "Go, Eve, before this becomes something neither of us can undo." But she didn't move, and when he finally kissed her, it wasn't passion that drove it. It was surrender. Outside, thunder rolled across the hills. The horses shifted restlessly in their stalls. Somewhere in the darkness, a door opened, the faintest sound of boots on wood. Evelyn broke away, breath trembling. Caleb's eyes widened, already knowing. Thomas stood at the threshold, his expression hollow, the stormlight glinting off his face. For a long, terrible moment, none of them spoke. The air was so still it seemed even the earth waited. Then Thomas turned, walking out into the rain without a word. The silence that followed felt like the world holding its breath before it shattered. The reckoning. Dawn came gray and hollow, a light too thin to warn the earth. Rain had fallen through the night, turning the yard to mud and washing away the footprints that led from the barn. Evelyn stood at the doorway, her shawl clutched tight, staring into the distance where Thomas had vanished hours before. The hills were still, the air thick with the ache of things that could not be undone. Caleb moved behind her, silent, weary. His face was drawn, older than it had been the day before. He carried a weight no man should bear, the guilt of a father, the shame of a sinner, and the quiet sorrow of someone who'd wanted too much for mercy. He's gone, Evelyn said softly, though the truth had already settled between them like dust. Caleb nodded. He'll find his own way. Her voice trembled. And if he doesn't, then it's a choice he made, same as the rest of us. They didn't speak again for a long while. The wind crept through the open doorway, carrying the faint smell of rain and iron. Evelyn could still feel Caleb's touch from the night before, an echo that lived in her skin, both comfort and curse. By midday, the sun broke through the clouds. Caleb hitched the wagon, saying he needed to check the far fence line. Evelyn followed, unwilling to be left alone with her thoughts. They worked in silence, the kind that had its own fragile peace. At the edge of the property, they found one of the gates torn open, the wood splintered. The storm had done its damage, but it wasn't the fence that held Evelyn's attention. It was the emptiness beyond it. The horizon stretched endlessly, as though mocking the idea of belonging. She turned to Caleb. You said once that freedom doesn't heal what love breaks. He looked at her steadily. I remember. Then what does? Caleb's expression softened, the faintest trace of sorrow in his eyes. Time, maybe, or forgiveness, if you're brave enough to ask for it. Are you? He hesitated, then said no, not yet. They finished their work by late afternoon. On the ride back, the quiet between them felt gentler, less like punishment and more like acceptance. But as they neared the house, a figure appeared on the road. Thomas, walking slowly, his coat dark with rain and dust. Evelyn's breath caught. Caleb stopped the wagon but didn't move to meet him. Thomas approached, eyes hollow but calm. He looked at his father, then at Evelyn, as though seeing both clearly for the first time. I thought I'd shoot him, Thomas said, voice low, almost detached. That's what I wanted last night. But I didn't. Caleb's hands tightened on the reins. I'm glad you didn't. Thomas gave a bitter laugh. Don't be. I might have felt cleaner if I had. Evelyn stepped down from the wagon, her boots sinking into the wet earth. Thomas. He shook his head. Don't. You don't owe me anything. I just came back from my horse. Where will you go? Caleb asked. South, Thomas said. Far as I can. He looked back at his father, eyes glinting with unspoken hurt. You said you bought her for me, but maybe you just wanted to prove you could still save someone. Caleb flinched, but didn't deny it. Thomas turned to Evelyn. Whatever happened, I don't hate you for it, but I can't stay where every fence line looks like a memory. He mounted his horse without another word. The sound of hooves faded into the distance until there was nothing left but wind. Evelyn stood motionless, the ache in her chest spreading like a bruise. Caleb remained by the wagon, shoulders bowed beneath the weight of what they'd lost. That evening, the sky turned crimson, the kind of color that looked like forgiveness trying to break through. Evelyn sat on the porch, mending one of Thomas's old shirts she'd found in the barn. The fabric smelled faintly of cedar and rain. Caleb joined her, setting down a cup of coffee. Was he right? She asked. Did you buy me to save someone? He sat heavily beside her. At first, maybe, but not after I knew your name. Her hand stilled. Then what am I to you now? He was quiet for a long time before answering. A reminder that even the right thing done for the wrong reason can still matter. Evelyn looked toward the fading light. You could have sent me away. After everything. I could have, he said. But mercy doesn't end when it gets hard. They fell into silence again, the kind that didn't hurt. The night came slow and soft, carrying the sounds of crickets and a whisper of wind through the tall grass. Later, as the stars rose, Evelyn walked to the gate, the same one where her chains had once been struck off. The metal links hung there still, rusted now, swaying in the breeze. She ran her fingers over them, then let them fall. Behind her, Caleb's voice came from the shadows. You'll leave someday. I can see it in you. Maybe, she said, but not tonight. He stepped closer, his boots whispering against the dirt. If you go, take my blessing with you. Evelyn turned, the dim lamplight outlining his face. And if I stay? Caleb looked at her for a long moment. Then I'll spend the rest of my days trying to deserve that. The air between them shifted. No passion, No promises, just the quiet understanding of two people bound by what they could never undo. Evelyn smiled faintly, the first true smile she'd worn since the auction. "Then we'll call it even," she said. The night swallowed their words, leaving only the sound of the wind through the grass and the steady creak of the porch boards. The past had not forgiven them, but it had stopped chasing. Above the horizon, the stars burned cold and clear, witnesses to a love that had broken all the rules and somehow, in its ruin, found its own kind of grace.